Today I'd like to talk about national debt, which is a big issue at the moment, with the government borrowing a very large amount to try and overcome the current recession. The national debt is the total amount of money that the government owe to the private sector. The national debt is owned by many private individuals and private pension funds and investment trusts. A very small percentage is held by foreigners, but most of it in the UK is held by UK investment trusts and private investors. The national debt in the UK is about 512 billion, or 43% of GDP, but this of course is forecast to rise in the next few years. Firstly, in a recession, national debt tends to rise because government tax revenues fall, but the government have to spend more on unemployment benefits. But in addition to these automatic fiscal stabilisers, the government is trying to stimulate the economy through tax cuts and spending increases. And this is why next year the government is forecast to borrow over 100 billion, perhaps as much as 120 billion, and this will increase the size of the UK national debt quite significantly. Now, many people see these figures and become quite concerned that surely borrowing 500, 600 billion suggests many economic problems. Well, the first thing to know is that the UK has borrowed a lot more in the past. After the Second World War, national debt was over, I think, 145% of GDP. In the early 1970s, national debt was about 70% of GDP. Other countries compare even less favourably. The United States has public sector debt of 73%, or 11 trillion. Italy has national debt of over 100% of GDP. And Japan, one of the highest, at 195% of GDP, which reflects their long decade of stagnation. But anyway, high levels of national debt do pose various problems. Firstly, if national debt as a percentage of GDP is rising, then at some time in the future the government will have to increase tax or cut spending. Secondly, it's argued that higher government borrowing may push up interest rates because the government need to offer higher rates to attract people to buy the debt. However, I should say that it's not very clear how much this actually occurs. Japan borrows 195% of GDP, but interest rates are still very low in Japan, so it's not that significant. Another potential problem is that it may cause inflation, especially if the government finance the national debt by printing money. But at the moment, inflation isn't our biggest concern, and unfortunately there is the appetite or the willingness to buy government bonds because other investments like the stock market, buying houses, are not very attractive, at least with government bonds as security. So even the very high levels of extra borrowing, the government will find that people are willing to buy it. So national debt is problematic in the sense that in the future we have higher taxes, but from an economic point of view, borrowing isn't always bad. Firstly, if you borrow to invest in infrastructure, then it can lead to higher rates of growth and help to pay taxes back. Now, people may dispute whether the government spending actually increases productivity, but it is theoretically possible. But the main reason to borrow is to counter a cyclical downturn. So, in a recession, with aggregate demand falling, the last thing you want to do is to try and balance a budget. Because if we were to increase taxes, cut spending now, it would make the recession worse. And this is what happened in the Great Depression of 1930. The Labour government, on the advice of Treasury economists, increased taxes and cut unemployment benefits, just as the Great Depression was taking hold, and of course this made it a lot worse. So by borrowing more now, the government is hoping to get the economy out of recession quicker, because if they cut taxes, people hopefully spend more. And as the economy recovers, then the government will see increased tax revenues quicker than if the recession was prolonged. Now, some people doubt whether tax cuts will actually encourage people to spend more, but I think that it will do something to help, because spending is very muted at the moment. And if taxes have to rise when the economy recovers, this is not necessarily a bad thing, for it may be politically unpopular, but from an economic point of view, the economy is growing strongly, then high taxes will just help to moderate the increase in growth, help to keep inflation low, and that is not a problem either. Another issue with national debt is people argue that actually is a lot higher than the government admits. This is because of our pension liabilities, private finance initiatives. So there is something there, in the sense that with an ageing population, the government is going to have to be spending more on pensions, and this is a guide to future national debt. It's going to be difficult to reduce it in the future, because pension commitments will be rising. So it is a shame that national debt increased during the boom years. In 2001, national debt in the UK had fallen as low as 29% of GDP, but the government allowed the national debt to increase to 37% at the start of this year, and with the nationalisation of Northern Rock, it's increased even more. If they'd kept national debt constant as a percentage of GDP, they would have had much more scope for expansionary fiscal policy now. But although national debt is undesirable, I think the government are doing the right thing to try to borrow more in a recession. And when the economy recovers, taxes should rise, and then the government has to reduce national debt as a percentage of GDP.